The comic book industry thrives on a fascinating dance between rivalry and reverence. For decades, Marvel and DC have stood as two pillars of the superhero genre, but a closer look reveals a hidden dialogue between them. It's a story of creative inspiration, where archetypes are borrowed, twisted, and reinvented. This isn't about plagiarism. It's about evolution. Today, we're counting down the top 10 Marvel characters who began as clear reflections of DC's icons. At number 10, Death's Head. In the late 1980s, DC's Lobo exploded onto the scene, a brutal, chainsaw-wielding intergalactic bounty hunter whose absurd violence and dark humor made him an instant cult classic. Marvel's response arrived in the form of Death's Head. Yes. Created by Simon Furman and Jeff Sr., this freelance peacekeeping agent shared Lobo's profession and his cynical, mercenary outlook. They both operated in the grimy corners of the cosmos, taking jobs for the right price. But the execution was uniquely Marvel. Where Lobo was a hulking, unkillable force of nature, Death's Head was a sleek, calculating mechanoid. His humor was drier, more understated, rooted in a clinical efficiency rather than chaotic revelry. This key difference in design and demeanor allowed Death's Head to quickly escape the Lobo clone label and become a beloved, quirky fixture in the Marvel Universe, with memorable runs in his own series and crossovers with everyone from Doctor Who to the Fantastic Four. At number 9, The Shroud. The blueprint of Batman is one of the most influential in all of comics, a traumatized billionaire who wages a war on crime using his intellect, resources, and mastery of the shadows. Marvel's The Shroud, created by Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin, took that blueprint and dipped it in the supernatural. Like Bruce Wayne, Maximilian Quincy was a wealthy social heir, but his transformation wasn't self-driven, it was mystical. After a failed attempt to infiltrate a cult, he gained the power to literally manipulate darkness, becoming a vigilante who didn't just hide in the shadows, he was the shadow. This crucial twist infused the street-level vigilante archetype with a dose of gothic horror, a hallmark of Marvel's more mystical side. The Shroud became a defender of the night, but his methods and origins were distinctly his own, proving a concept could be familiar yet feel entirely fresh.
At number 8, Moonstone. DC's Power Girl represents a specific archetype, the powerful, confident, and sometimes headstrong Kryptonian powerhouse. Marvel's answer to this archetype isn't a hero, but one of its most compelling villains, Dr. Carla Sofin, aka Moonstone. Initially a corrupt psychiatrist, Sofin usurped the powers and identity of the original Moonstone, gaining abilities that mirror Power Girl's super strength, flight, and photon-based energy projection. But that's where the similarities end. Moonstone is a master manipulator, a founding member of the Thunderbolts, and a character whose psychological complexity is her true weapon. She is narcissistic, cunning, and morally flexible, using her powers for personal gain and twisted games. Marvel took the powerful blonde archetype and subverted it, creating a villain whose internal battles are just as intense as her physical ones. At number 7, Toxin. The theme of the flawed duplicate is a classic comic book trope, and DC's Bizarro, a distorted, backwards-thinking clone of Superman, is its most famous embodiment. Marvel's symbiote lineage offers a parallel, particularly with Toxin. As the 1000th generation offspring of the Venom symbiote, Toxin is, in essence, a copy of a copy, several steps removed from the original. Like Bizarro, Toxin is a creature of immense power, struggling with a fractured and unstable identity. However, Marvel's approach is rooted in body horror and addiction, rather than tragic parody. The bond between Toxin and its host, Patrick Mulligan, is a constant battle against a predatory inherited rage. This internal conflict reflects Marvel's preference for grounded, psychological struggle over DC's more conceptual and metaphorical doppelgangers. At number 6, Speed Demon. The Flash's Rogues Gallery is iconic, and few villains are as personal and terrifying as Professor Zoom, the Reverse Flash. Defined by his obsession with Barry Allen and his twisted control over the Speed Force, he is a villain defined by a personal connection. Marvel's Speed Demon, created by Mark Gruenwald, presents a fascinating corporate-era counterpart. Originally the hero Speedball, Robbie Baldwin's identity was co-opted by the supervillain group, the Squadron Sinister. Donning a yellow and blue costume, he became Speed Demon, a villain with super speed. The visual nod to the Reverse Flash is unmistakable. However, Speed Demon's motivations were different. He was less a personal nemesis and more of a cynical thrill-seeker and reluctant villain, often caught up in plots bigger than himself. This distinction in character motive gave the speedster villain a new flavor. At number 5, Nighthawk. For a direct, corporate-mandated counterpart to Batman, one need not look further than Nighthawk. As a core member of the Squadron Supreme, Marvel's notorious pastiche of the Justice League, Nighthawk is Bruce Wayne in all but name. Kyle Richmond is a billionaire industrialist with no superpowers who uses his wealth, intellect, and physical prowess to fight crime. He even has his own Bat-Tave and themed gadgets. But Marvel quickly used this imitation to explore darker narratives. Nighthawk's stories often delved into the moral compromises of vigilantism. In the seminal 1985 Squadron Supreme maxi-series, he is a central figure in a story that asks, what happens when beings with absolute power try to force a utopia? This willingness to deconstruct the very archetype he mimics is what makes Nighthawk a compelling character in his own right. At number 3, Gladiator, also known as Calurk. When you need a Superman-level powerhouse for a cosmic story, you create a Superman-level powerhouse. That's precisely what Marvel did with Gladiator, the stalwart leader of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, a team itself inspired by DC's Legion of Superheroes. Gladiator, also known as Calurk, possesses the classic suite of abilities: incalculable strength, flight, invulnerability, and heat vision. He is the unwavering protector of an empire, much like Superman is of Earth. However, Marvel introduced a critical psychological flaw. Gladiator's powers are intrinsically linked to his confidence. If he doubts himself or his cause, his strength wanes, his invulnerability fails. This vulnerability is a quintessential Marvel twist, transforming a seemingly invincible archetype into a relatable character whose greatest battle is often against his own insecurities. At number 3, the Sentry. The concept of a Superman-like figure is common in comic books, but Marvel's Sentry is perhaps the most brilliant and devastating deconstruction of the archetype. Created by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee, Robert Reynolds appears as Marvel's Superman, the golden guardian of humanity with the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns, a flowing cape, and a prominent S on his chest. But Marvel immediately subverts expectations by injecting profound psychological horror into the mythos. The Sentry is mentally ill, plagued by his dark alternate personality, the Void. His history is so cataclysmic that the entire world, including himself, had their memories wiped to contain the trauma. The Sentry explores the terrifying implications of godlike power coupled with severe mental fragility, a theme that resonates deeply in the more psychologically nuanced Marvel universe. He is not just a powerful hero, he is a tragedy. At number 2, Hyperion. If the Sentry is a deconstruction of Superman, various versions of Hyperion have served as Marvel's straight-up homage, exploration, and critique of the archetype. As a founding member of the Squadron Supreme, Hyperion's origin is a clear parallel. He is the last son of a doomed world, rocketed to Earth and blessed with incredible powers under a yellow sun. Some iterations of Hyperion are noble, striving to live up to an ideal. Others are despotic tyrants, believing their power gives them the right to rule. Others still are weary, lonely survivors. This multiversal flexibility allows Marvel to use Hyperion as a narrative tool to examine every facet of the Superman mythos: the hope, the isolation, the potential for tyranny, and the burden of power, making him one of the most versatile and interesting counterparts in comics. At number 1, the Squadron Supreme. The number 1 spot cannot go to a single character, but to the concept that embodies this creative dialogue: the Squadron Supreme. This entire team is, from its inception, Marvel's unabashed pastiche of the Justice League. Hyperion is Superman, Nighthawk is Batman, Power Princess is Wonder Woman, the Wizard is the Flash, and Dr. Spectrum is Green Lantern. But to dismiss them as mere copies is to miss their entire purpose. The Squadron exists as a narrative mirror. In their most famous story, the 1985 Squadron Supreme maxi-series by Mark Gruenwald, they are used to explore the terrifying consequences of unchecked power as they attempt to brainwash humanity into creating a perfect utopia. They are a cautionary tale, a thought experiment, and a critique of the very ideals their DC counterparts represent. They are the ultimate example of how inspiration can be the starting point for something new, groundbreaking, and profoundly impactful.